A 10-year-old black boy bursts into Manhattan's most exclusive restaurant, speaking perfect Arabic to a billionaire who hasn't seen his missing son in 6 months. The child's first words shatter a glass and bring a grown man to tears. What this kid knows will change everything, and the secret he's carrying will leave you speechless. The Saudi-American oil executive had built his fortune bridging Middle Eastern investments with American markets, but tonight's success felt like poison coursing through his veins. 6 months had passed since his son Youssef disappeared during a volunteer mission to help Afghan refugees at the Mexican border, and despite hiring private investigators across 3 states, spending nearly $500,000, and following dozens of false leads, there had been nothing but deafening silence. Ahmed's hands trembled as he stared at his phone, the same photo of Youssef burned into his retinas, his 24-year-old son's radiant smile beside a group of refugee children, his MIT engineering degree abandoned for humanitarian work that simultaneously filled Ahmed's heart with pride and crushed it with terror. "Oh God, where is my son?" Ahmed whispered in Arabic, his voice breaking like shattered glass. His wife Layla had begged him to hire more investigators, to offer rewards that would bankrupt smaller companies, to never surrender hope. But what she didn't know, what would destroy her if she discovered, was that Ahmed was drowning in despair, suffocating on the possibility that his firstborn might be gone forever. The elevator doors burst open with a violent chime, and out exploded a small figure that sent shock waves through the pristine restaurant atmosphere. A boy, no more than 10 years old, his second-hand Nike sneakers screaming against the polished marble floor as he sprinted past startled diners. His clothes were clean but screamed poverty, a faded Detroit Lions t-shirt hanging like a tent on his skeletal frame and jeans with patches that told stories of hardship. His dark skin was slick with sweat and desperation, his small chest heaving as if he had run through the fires of hell to get here. The hostess, a statuesque woman draped in designer black, lunged forward like a predator protecting her territory. "Stop right there. This is a private establishment for members only. Security. Please." The boy's voice erupted like a volcano, cutting through the restaurant's genteel murmur like a scream in a library. "I need Ahmed Al-Rashid. His son is dying." The word "dying" detonated through the terrace like a bomb. Conversations ceased mid-sentence. Forks froze halfway to mouths. The entire restaurant held its breath as if the world had suddenly stopped spinning. Ahmed's phone crashed to the floor, the screen spiderwebbing as his blood turned to ice water. His eyes locked onto this impossible child who had just spoken his worst nightmare into existence. The boy stumbled forward, pushing past the stunned hostess, weaving between tables of Manhattan's elite who recoiled as if he carried a contagious disease. Tears were already streaming down his face, carving rivers through the dust and exhaustion. When he reached Ahmed's table, he collapsed to his knees like a pilgrim before an altar, his small hands pressed against the marble as he looked up with eyes that had seen too much suffering for someone so young. The boy sobbed in perfect, heartbreaking Arabic. "Mr. Ahmed, your son is dying in the hospital. I'm the only child who knows where he is." The words hit Ahmed like bullets to the chest. The Arabic wasn't just perfect, it was spoken with the exact Gulf accent of his deceased father, the same tender inflection his mother had used when comforting him as a child. Ahmed's glass of sparkling water exploded against the marble floor, sending crystal shards flying like his shattered hopes. "No, no, no!" Ahmed screamed, his voice raw with anguish as he shot to his feet, his chair clattering backward. "How do you know this? Who are you?" The boy's tiny frame shook with sobs that seemed to come from the depths of his soul. "My name is Marcus Washington," he choked out in English, his voice barely audible through his tears. Your son saved my father's life. And now he's going to die because nobody knows who he really is. Ahmed felt his legs give out. He crashed back into his chair, his face white as death, his hands clutching his chest as if his heart was trying to escape his ribcage. Around them, the restaurant had become a theater of stunned silence, every eye fixed on this devastating drama unfolding before them. Where? Ahmed gasped, his voice nothing more than a broken whisper. Where is my son? Marcus fumbled with trembling hands in his pocket, pulling out a cracked phone that looked like it had been through a war zone. His fingers shook so violently he could barely swipe to the photograph, but when he finally found it, he thrust it toward Ahmed like a sacred relic. The image destroyed what remained of Ahmed's composure. There was Youssef, thinner, more tired than Ahmed had ever seen him, but unmistakably his precious son. He stood in what looked like a refugee shelter, his arms wrapped protectively around a group of children. Among them was a smaller, younger version of Marcus, both of them smiling with the innocent joy that only children possess. Houston, Marcus sobbed, the word torn from his throat like a confession extracted under torture. He's been in a coma for 4 months at Houston Methodist Hospital. The doctors say his brain is swelling and if his family doesn't come soon. The boy couldn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. The implication hung in the air like a death sentence. 4 months. Ahmed roared, his voice echoing across the terrace like thunder. Several diners jumped in their seats, wine glasses trembling in manicured hands. Why didn't anyone contact me? Why didn't the hospital call? Marcus's sobs intensified until his whole body convulsed with grief. Because he was using a fake name, he screamed through his tears. He was trying to protect the families he was helping. The hospital thinks he's David Rodriguez. Nobody knows he's your son except me. The revelation hit Ahmed like a sledgehammer to the skull. His brilliant, idealistic son, too noble for his own good, had been lying unconscious and alone in a hospital for 4 months while Ahmed had been searching the entire continent for him. Why didn't you call me sooner? Ahmed demanded, his voice cracking with pain and rage. Why come here like this? I tried. Marcus screamed, his young voice breaking with the weight of months of frustration and desperation. I called your offices every day for 3 weeks. They hung up on me because I'm just a kid. Nobody would listen. Nobody believed me. The boy pulled out a tattered notebook, its pages water-stained with tears, filled with phone numbers and desperate notes written in both English and Arabic. I spent every penny my dad saved for his new work boots to come here. I've been sleeping in bus stations and eating from garbage cans for 3 days, going to every fancy restaurant in Manhattan looking for you. Ahmed's heart shattered completely. This child, this brave, desperate little boy, had sacrificed everything, risked everything, suffered everything, just to save his son. Your father, Ahmed whispered, his voice hollow with shock. Where is your father? Working double shifts in El Paso, Marcus sobbed. He's a janitor at the refugee center where your son worked. He doesn't even know I'm here. I lied to him because I knew he'd try to stop me. But I made a promise, Mr. Ahmed. I made a promise. What promise? Ahmed asked, leaning forward despite the chaos around them. Marcus reached into his pocket with shaking hands and pulled out a small, leather journal so worn it looked like it might disintegrate at any moment. The night before the accident, your son gave me this. He made me swear on my father's life that if anything ever happened to him, I would find you and give you this journal. Ahmed's hands trembled violently as he accepted the journal. The leather was warm from being pressed against Marcus's heart for months. When he opened it, his son's familiar handwriting swam before his tear-blurred eyes. The first entry was dated 8 months earlier. I met a kid today who reminds me of myself at his age. Marcus Washington, 10 years old, speaks perfect Arabic and English, has a father who works harder than anyone I've ever met, just like Dad did when we first came to America. This boy is special, and his father sacrifices everything for him. They make me think of us, Dad. They make me understand why you worked so hard to give me opportunities. Ahmed's vision blurred completely as tears poured down his face. Page after page revealed his son's deepest thoughts, his love for his father, his desperate desire to make Ahmed proud while following his own path. One entry, written just days before the accident, made Ahmed's heart stop. Marcus asked me today why I don't just work for Dad's company if I love him so much. How do you explain to a 10-year-old that sometimes the greatest way to honor your father is to use the values he taught you in ways he never expected? Dad came to America with nothing and built an empire. I want to use that same strength and determination to help people who are where Dad was 40 years ago, scared, alone, hoping for a chance at something better. Maybe Dad won't understand at first, but I pray that someday he'll see that everything good in me came from him. Ahmed doubled over as if he'd been physically struck, his sobs echoing across the silent terrace. Around them, hardened business executives and society women were dabbing at their eyes with expensive napkins. He wrote about you every day, Marcus whispered through his own tears. Every single day. He said you were his hero, that everything he knew about being a good man came from watching you. Ahmed looked up at this extraordinary child through his tears and saw not just a messenger, but an angel who had descended from heaven to save his son's life. Marcus, Ahmed said, his voice raw with emotion, what happened the night of the accident? The boy's face crumpled with fresh anguish. Ice raided the center. Everyone was running and screaming. Your son found me and my dad hiding in a supply closet. Dad was terrified, he's been undocumented for 20 years, and if they caught us, they'd deport him and put me in foster care. Marcus wiped his nose with his sleeve, his young voice growing stronger as he continued. But your son, he didn't hesitate. He grabbed us both and said, nobody gets left behind. He put us in his car and was driving us to sanctuary at a church across town. And then? Ahmed whispered. A drunk driver ran a red light, Marcus sobbed. Hit us right on your son's side. I woke up 3 days later in the hospital. Dad had broken ribs and a concussion. But Youssef never woke up. Ahmed felt like his soul was being torn from his body. His son had been lying unconscious and alone for 4 months while Ahmed had been frantically searching everywhere except the one place he never thought to look. The hospital couldn't identify him, Marcus continued through his tears. His wallet was lost in the crash. All they found was his fake volunteer ID. And we were too scared to tell them who he really was because we were afraid they'd ask too many questions about why we were with him. The full tragedy of the situation crashed over Ahmed like a tsunami. His son, his brilliant, compassionate, selfless son, had been catalogued as a John Doe, with no family, no visitors except for a 10-year-old boy and his janitor father who had been secretly paying whatever they could toward his medical bills. You've been visiting him? Ahmed asked, his voice barely audible. Every week, Marcus nodded, fresh tears streaming. I talk to him in Arabic and English. I tell him about my school, about my dad's work, about how we're both praying for him to wake up. The nurses think I'm his little brother. Ahmed stood slowly, his legs shaking like a newborn colt. Without hesitation, he knelt down in front of Marcus's chair, not caring that every eye in the restaurant was watching, not caring about his expensive suit or his reputation. He pulled this brave little boy into his arms and held him tight. "You saved him," Ahmed whispered into Marcus's ear, his voice breaking completely. "You saved my son. You saved me." Ahmed pulled back, looking directly into Marcus's tear-filled eyes. "And now we're going to save him together." The next 2 hours passed in a blur of frantic phone calls and desperate arrangements. Ahmed's pilot was summoned, his jet fueled for an emergency flight to Houston. He called Layla, who collapsed with relief and terror when she heard the news. He called the hospital, identifying himself as the father of David Rodriguez and demanding to speak with his son's doctors. As they prepared to leave for the airport, Ahmed turned to Marcus. "Your father, he needs to know where you are. He needs to be with us." Marcus nodded, his small body still trembling with exhaustion and emotion. When they reached Ahmed's father on the phone, the man's voice cracked with a mixture of relief, pride, and overwhelming gratitude. "Mr. Al-Rashid," the man said through his tears, "my son, my boy did this because your son taught him that family isn't just blood. It's about who you'd risk everything to save." "Your son is a hero," Ahmed replied, his own voice thick with emotion. "And you raised him to be one. We're coming to get you, and then we're all going to Houston together." As Ahmed's private jet lifted off into the night sky above New York, Marcus pressed his face to the window, watching the city lights disappear below. For the first time in months, hope flickered in his young heart. "Mr. Ahmed," Marcus said in Arabic, his voice barely a whisper, "do you think Yusuf knows we're coming?" Ahmed reached over and took the boy's small hand in his own. "I think he's been waiting for us," he replied softly. "I think he's been fighting to stay alive until his family could find him." As the plane flew through the darkness toward Houston, Ahmed reflected on the miracle that had unfolded that evening. A 10-year-old boy had traveled across a continent, risked everything, suffered unimaginably, all to keep a promise to someone who had shown him kindness. In doing so, he had not only saved Yusuf's life, but had taught Ahmed the true meaning of family. The boy who spoke 2 languages had given Ahmed the most important lesson of his life, that love transcends every barrier, that courage comes in the smallest packages, and that sometimes angels appear as children who refuse to break their promises. In the darkness outside the airplane window, Ahmed whispered a prayer in Arabic, not just for his son's recovery, but for the strength to be worthy of the extraordinary sacrifice this brave little boy had made. Marcus and his father had given everything to save Yusuf. Now Ahmed would spend the rest of his life making sure they never wanted for anything again. Because family isn't just about blood. It's about who you'd risk everything to save. And tonight, a 10-year-old hero had shown him what real family looks like.